Squire, the Director of Sales and Marketing here at VaultLogix. John has been with VaultLogix for 8 years and brings over 15 years of backup and storage industry experience with him. John?
Thanks, Melody, and thanks for everyone joining us today. First, let's start out by defining what is a backup policy. As we have here, it's a set of guidelines outlining how your company protects business-critical information. But as we go through talking about that backup policy, some of the key features is, as it says here, define what information should be backed up. In this case, it means talk to all departments and find out what's important. What's important to them might not be important to the rest of the company, but that information is important. Also, when should it be backed up? Make sure is it during non-business hours, so lack of interruptions? Is it something that's scheduled at night, during the day, at multiple times? Also, how it should be backed up. Not only the technology of how it to be backed up, but also how often should it be backed up? Hourly, multiple times during the day, weekly, monthly? And then lastly, length of retention. How long do you hold on to it? This could be different per different applications, different types of data, or even different requirements bringing towards a compliancy or business requirements as well. So, moving forward, you might be asking yourself, why do I need a policy? Here are the 3 main reasons why. Number one, simply for data protection, so that when a disaster happens, you have a document, you have the policy to guide you. You're not trying to do that in the time of the disaster. Number 2, data retention. You need to understand how far back can you go and what's available to be restored, and having that policy available to do that. Third, I have it listed here as rogue clouds. This is really the ability to understand that if any other departments or individuals are utilizing their own cloud or backup solution, because the key to this is making sure that you have a policy solution that's uniform throughout the company. So understanding why, this is why you need a policy. So what are the questions that need to be answered? Well, the basics are the who, the what, the where, the when, and the how. Number 1, who. So define the roles of the individuals who need access. Not everybody needs access, and understand what level of access they need. What? Determine what levels of importance of the data should be backed up. Is email more critical than databases or files? In some cases, a database may be more critical. So making sure you understand what data should be backed up. Where? Where's the data going to go? Where's the backup going to be located? Does this need to get off-site? Does it not? Does it need to be away from the building? When? When should these actual backups occur? Is this once a day, once a week, once a month? Is it multiple times during the day? Is it every hour? Understand those questions. And then lastly, how? How should they be protected? This goes into a key point of talking about security that always comes up, but making sure how are you going to protect this in regards to making sure that the information, the data is encrypted. But also on top of that is a username and password to help protect that as well.
Great, and at this point I'm going to go ahead with a poll question. Our question here is, how do you manage backups when the administrator isn't in the office? Right, we'll just give it another couple of seconds here to let people get their votes in. All right. So it looks like we have about 22% do nothing, and the remaining 76% have a second person already trained.
Well, that's good to know. You know, when looking at, if we go to the next slide of who has access to the backups, you know, one thing I've seen here over the 8+ years I've been in VaultLogix, and the 15, you know, I don't know how many years now, selling backup and storage technologies, is making sure that there is someone available. But not only that, as it says here, is talking about who has access to the backups. You don't want to give everyone access, even all department heads. You want to make sure that there's a few people that have access so you can keep track of what needs to get done, making sure everything's successful and not too many hands in there. Which goes back to the rules and roles of people with regards to access. But in some cases, you know, that 22% is kind of scary. And the reason why I say that is we have a customer of ours I personally was involved in years ago when starting here. And the main reason why they came on with VaultLogix is they were running their tape backups, and they were able actually to restore from their tapes when they needed to. However, the admin that was running the backups went on vacation for a week. They had a disaster and needed to do a restore. What they found out was no one replaced them to make sure that the backups are running, the tapes are being swapped, and the only information they had available was from the previous week's backup, which was to them was useless. So they ended up coming on board. But it is important to know that, you know, if that person is running it, there is a backup to that as well. So what kinds of data should be backed up? You look at there's different types of looking at a backup of how things can be run. There's a full image of information of a server. There's a full backup as well as an incremental backup. And if you look at the three different types, they kind of offer different kinds of solutions and are benefits in both cases. A full image is great for disaster recovery, gives you the ability to restore an image of the entire server back to where it needs to be. But in some cases, it isn't as granular, where you might not have the ability to restore a single file or just that piece of information that you need. And the restores are a little bit longer because you're restoring everything. Then there's also making sure you do a full backup. That means backing up all the data that's available every day. This is great for certain types of applications, especially Microsoft Exchange, which is typically a requirement from them saying it should be a full backup every day. And then there's an incremental backup. This is done for larger data sets that can't be, full backups can't be run daily. So what they do is you run a full backup and then an incremental backup throughout the week. This is great because your backups are faster so you can get through your backups, but when doing a restore, you of course then have to restore the full backup and then the incrementals included. Looking out, taking another step towards what kinds of data should be backed up and what you should be looking at, well, there is looking at defining what is critical data compared to what's non-critical data. And the key to that is what's important. You know, keeping the critical data should be the data that keeps the company in business. Then the non-critical data is, you know, could be important, but not as important. You can live without it, or if it took a longer time to get back. But you also need to understand how are you going to handle this, because you still need to protect it in most cases. And lastly here, talking about best practices, it does talk that, you know, some things that happen is in most companies there's a lot of personal data that's held on laptops, desktops, file servers, making sure you define that you're not backing up non-mission critical or non-business related information. And it brings me to another story. Years ago, I had a customer who we were looking to back up their file servers. They had a ton of data, creating information. And when we were looking to protect them, as we went through to do the backup jobs and do a little investigation, we found that they had half a terabyte of data that was made up of MP3s of multiple different employees, music, videos, movies, and realizing that that really doesn't belong there, even though to free up that space was available. But understand what's on the network as well. So as we continue on, the next part is talking about, well, where should the data be located? And on the top part, it talks about physical, you know, versus the cloud. So the physical being, this is your infrastructure, your environment. You know, it could be replication, it could be to disk, it could be to tape, but it's your information, it's your stuff that you own. Then the other side of it is the cloud. This is, you know, a complete offsite, a completely outsourced solution, but it should be looked at. Some critical data may need to be backed up in multiple locations. And the point of this is saying you might have a mission-critical application, and only one copy of it is not good enough. Because if the data itself that's sitting on the server is not available, that one single copy that you have for whatever reason is bad, corrupt, the backup didn't work, you need to have another layer. And that can be done in different ways. It can be done with a mixture of physical and the cloud, meaning you could do something like a tape or replication or disk and utilize the cloud. And that gives you the ability to have multiple sets or solution of it. And also in some cases, be it the different technology or a cloud technology, giving you two different locations where that data is actually being located. Also understanding non-critical data, that can be backed up once, most likely could be offsite. It could be in some cases where people are only doing an on-site backup of that data so that it is at least away from the machines that it is stored on, but having a plan to understand where that should be. And also when dealing with large databases, backing them up multiple times and to multiple locations can be advantageous as well. There are companies out there that have critical databases that if they had to restore from the previous day, it might be useless, or they've lost a lot of money. So the ability to back it up multiple times during the day, every hour, or at 12 and at 8 for critical information is important as well. So when should the backups run? Backups during off hours when the systems are typically not in use is kind of the key component. It's what we've been living off of for years. So at night and weekends are typically the best times because, of course, it's less disruptive on people or users. But also understand that different data types can be backed up at different time frames, such as days, weeks, and months. So retentions can be set at differently. This could be driven by multiple different things with regards to a business requirement for the company that their email is more important. Therefore, we need to hold on for a longer time, or it might be coming down from a specific compliancy, the SEC, Sarbanes-Oxley, or HIPAA, that's requiring you to hold on and retain and back up data at different times. And then also data change rates can be a big component of when the backup should run. So if you have a large change rate, let's say something like Exchange, there might be only the ability to be able to run it once a day because it won't have the ability to get through it if you try to do it multiple times. So when looking at different types of compliances, as I mentioned, or could it be business requirements, take a look to see what the codes are requiring. What are they telling you need to do? Do you have the business requirements for backups? And more importantly, the retention requirements are in most cases what needs to get done to handle that. So how should backups be protected? Security is always the #1 concern when it talks about data and data recovery. One thing we always say is always encrypt your data no matter the technology. Because in some cases, your reputation is on the line. And it's not only your reputation, but also the reputation of the company of if something was to get out, that data was lost. What does that mean? Use unique IDs and passwords. Should help control or guard the data. Basically, access control. Who has access? And also what's important is making sure that there are logs available so you can review those logs to see, well, if someone who doesn't have access is getting access or gaining access or is left. But that's very important. And of course, ensure that you back up your data with a technology that allows management, as I mentioned, access to data. Make sure who is doing what. So, as we've been kind of moving along here and talking about backup policy and why do you need it and some of the things, the questions to look at and what are some of the concerns. But really taking it a step further is that, it is more than just a policy. A backup policy needs to be intertwined with, of course, the strategy of the company. So what are the business requirements for data protection? And does this policy meet those requirements? Secondly is, if you just write this policy, you put it all together, you document it, you've written down, but if there's no strategy, if there's nothing put in place, it really is just a piece of paper. So the key components of that is to make sure that, number one, you enforce the policy. But number two, practice the policy. Verify it. Make sure that in case something does happen, it does work. You don't want to be in the place where when the disaster strikes is when the time that you're practicing and testing and verifying that that's available to be restored. That's the wrong time. And then, here are some basic key considerations that you need to think about before you start building the strategy and this policy. Number one is capability. Looking at it and understanding of you've done the research and you figure out what you need, but what do you need this policy, and more importantly, this technology to do? Number two is speed. Just like anything, the more money you spend, the faster anything can be, right? Money solves all problems. But there's also a question of how fast you need it to be. And it's not just looking at it from a backup standpoint, but you also need to look at it from a speed standpoint of a recoverability. Scalability is a huge one. The one thing that you don't want to do is it's hard to go back and ask for more. So you need to make sure that you have a solution in place and the policy in place that can handle the growth, that can handle the ability to what are things going to be like in a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now. So understand that you need to make sure that you have the ability to handle that growth. Reliability. Will it work when I need it? And that's really going more into play of making a decision via policy and then putting it into a technology is am I spending the right amount of money? Am I putting the technology in place that I can rely on to know that in case of that disaster does happen, I will be covered? And then lastly, it's kind of the all coming budget, right? And everyone's put into a budget, but what can you afford? Or more importantly, what can't you afford? What would happen if data wasn't available or the business units, certain business units couldn't run? But you need to have a budget to understand that as well. So moving to the next one is what it's saying is that it is a strategy. It is something that you need to understand. As it says here, you develop the strategy around the different business unit process needs, and to understand that what people don't might take that step to do is it's like an interview process. Go and interview all the departments. Find out what do they need, what are their requirements, what is their time that they can't live without to be able to get data back. And that's going into the time data requirements. What is it? What is it from a specific application? Could it be the marketing department couldn't live without the CRM within hours, but if it came down to their email, they could go a day without. Understand what their needs are. And of course, fit your budget to both the availability of resources and to the business needs. So what's the best solution for what you can afford? But also, what I've seen other companies do is we all know that IT and IT-related decisions, depending no matter where they are, in a lot of cases are considered a cost center. So one thing you can do is, I've seen other companies do, is maybe the budget can be taken from other business units for their data protection. So if you're offering out a solution and you've got the finance department, the sales department, customer support department, their needs are required for data protection to make sure it's up and available, maybe you can pull from their budget to make sure that you have the solution that best fits your need. So to go into a little bit here, to talk a little bit about VaultLogix, I know some of the people that have been on here multiple times. I've heard a lot of different webinars we've done. But just so you understand, VaultLogix, we are an online data backup service provider or cloud backup provider. We've been around for a while. We've been around since 2002, probably one of the older companies around. We have our own proprietary backup technology. We do have multiple data centers that's located throughout the country as well as in Canada for our international customers. We are the exclusive online backup provider for Ingram Micro. They are the largest distributor of hardware and software in the world. We have well over 9,000 business clients worldwide. That's in all 50 states as well as 20-plus countries. And we also have about 800-plus resellers or MSPs that actually offer out our service as their own. So to talk a little bit about, that was a little bit about the company, a little bit about kind of our service and how we deliver. Number one, we do call it a business class service. Our goal and our target demographic is not the consumer. It is the business person. So we offer off-site data protection combined with a local backup. So if you look at the ability that we talked about is locations and different types of need for critical and non-critical, what our solution does have is the ability to do getting your data off-site to multiple locations, as well as the ability to back up locally, which could give you the added ability for a third copy of your data, but also you could send non-critical data to that local copy as well. It is a single installation to back up multiple machines on the LAN. We do have the ability to back up SQL and Exchange without a plugin or an agent. We do have client and web-based access to your data, so you could, through a client that's sitting on the customer side, you could actually do backups and restores from to have access to it. But also, if anyone is in need of a single file, you could go through a web-based console to do that. We offer delta blocking data compression to increase backup performance. That talks about the speed is another issue to look at, as I mentioned before, some of the things to look at. We do have flexible retention schedules. We do have the ability to do multiple backups during the day. We could do dailies, weeklies, monthlies. No hardware purchase to require. From a scalability standpoint, as I mentioned before, it is you pay as you go. It's like a utility bill, so it helps with that need as well. So to conclude, I hope this was informative. As Melanie mentioned, we will be emailing out the presentation as well as a backup policy checklist. Also, just to be sure, next month we're doing the third part of our Online Backup 101, which is security in the cloud. So I hope you all can join us. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, John. We have had a couple of questions come up throughout the webinar that I thought I would take a chance to ask with you. Okay. Our first one comes from someone regarding critical data. They have a question around if their critical data is backed up to the cloud, what do you do with the non-critical data? Where do you put it?
Great question. It's kind of like I mentioned at the end there, talking about our delivery to service and kind of why we consider ourselves business class is, the key to everything is making sure that the critical data is backed up, making sure it's getting off-site, but it's to different locations. But there is the ability saying non-critical data. Maybe it doesn't get put off-site, but really making sure that it's at least away from the machines where it resides. And part of that is also the ability to make sure that having the ability to do a local backup, meaning our solution does allow you to differentiate between what goes on off-site and what goes on-site. You can use a hybrid of the two, or you could have non-critical data that maybe only goes on-site. It gets put to a different drive or a different storage device to help handle that. So that's the answer to that.
Great. We have another question here about data retention. This company requires that their long-term data retention, their data needs to be backed up long-term. How would backing up to the cloud handle that? Can the cloud handle long-term retention?
Great question. So if you look at how things are done, retention to me is the back end. It's how long you hold on to and have access to things. So the nice thing about the cloud, cloud backup, more about Vault Logix cloud backup, is having the ability to do multiple different kind of retentions to meet your needs. So the difference is that if you were to do, let's say you needed a year retention and you wanted to set up something where you had 5 dailies, 4 weeklies, and 12 monthlies, if you think about it, that means every day, Monday through Friday, would hold on to a copy of that data. But that also means that it backs up every single day. But the difference between what is backed up from a backup standpoint, you got to compare that to a retention is, well, which versions do we hold on to? Well, we hold on to the 5 dailies that's needed, and then we hold on to the 4 weeklies and the 12 monthlies. So the flexibility is there to meet any schema you may need, but again, it's backed up every day, but what are we holding on to for your ability to restore? So hopefully that answers that question.
Great, and I think we have time for one last question. This one comes from another person who is looking for a little bit more information on documenting your backup processes. So, how do you go about making sure that you document it properly and get it out to the right people?
So I guess I'm unclear of exactly the question. So I guess documenting the policy, or how is it presented again? I'm sorry, Melanie.
Documenting their backup processes.
So, I think it really depends on every company is going to be different. And also it might come down to different requirements that might be pushing it. If for most people that's on this call, there isn't any type of regulation or requirement coming out, being it HIPAA or Sarbanes-Oxley or the SEC, I guess part of it is understanding, well, what are you doing today for documentation of anything you're doing? So this might be a nice start. But also, I think a big part of this is understanding. I think I mentioned in the presentation was that interview process, right? Is going around all the different departments and different department heads and understanding, well, what do they need and what are the requirements? Once you've got those, then you can start documenting, how do I do this? How is it done per each data type, as I mentioned, or maybe different applications, and making sure that there's a central place where all this is documented that everyone has access to. And then it goes a step further of the person, the admin that's out of the office, or is sick one day, or God forbid he leaves the company and quits, or gets hit by a bus. Is there documentation somewhere that people have access to? And that documentation can be different per different companies. It could be, one company that only has one server could be different than that of someone who has 200 servers. So I guess that can be done in different ways. The nice thing is hopefully, Melanie, when we send out the policy that we're putting out, hopefully this could be a good start for some people. It might not be the document that they end up at the end of the day, but I think the one good thing it'll do is it'll start to get them thinking and making sure that when the time of a disaster does happen, they're not scrambling. The policy's in place, it's the guideline, and it hopefully will lead to their success.
Great, thank you, and thank you for your time today, John.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, as a reminder for everyone on the line, as John mentioned a couple of times, we will be sending out a backup policy template for you. It is designed to help you start setting up your own backup policy. And for any questions that we didn't get to, it looks like we have a lot on here. We will be reaching out to you individually to answer any questions you might have.
And thanks, everyone, for showing up.
Okay, thanks. Have a good day.